What we could have done today is we could have gone back a little bit in time to the last days of Moses, and in Deuteronomy 31 and the chapters leading up to the close of that book, this theme of courage is repeated to Moses himself, to the people of Israel, and here now in Joshua 1, we find it from God directly to Joshua. And I've said already, and I'm sure you noticed, that the call to courage occurs 3 times in these opening verses. And if you take a look at those verses, you can see them. First of all, verse 6, there is the phrase, be strong and of good courage. And then you've got verse 7, only be strong and very courageous. And then finally in verse 9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Now, you know, don't you, that if something's repeated in a passage of the Bible, then that's the main theme. You look out for repetition. And seeing this 3 times in 9 verses is a huge announcement that here is the theme of courage for Joshua. And you see, don't you, that it's always be strong and of good courage. I guess Joshua could have been anxious. He could have been worried. He could have been afraid. But instead, here's this call from God for him to be strong and of good courage. And as you and I are on this first day of a new year, I wonder how you would describe yourself. Are you feeling tearful? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling concerned? Well, here is God saying to you, and he's gathered us together. We are here not by accident this morning, but by design. God is saying to you and to me, and he's repeating that call to you, be strong and of good courage. And what I hope by the end of the morning is that we'll have some idea of how to be strong and of good courage. But just notice, first of all, the repetition in these verses of that call. It's as if Moses is underlining this with a big pen saying, now, guys, this is what I want you to hear. This is what God said to Joshua, be strong and of good courage. So what's the conditions then that Joshua is in? The conditions that give rise to the call to courage. Well, I want to show you 3 things. The first is context. So Joshua 1 verse 1, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua. Now there's the context. Joshua, after a long apprentice, a bit like Charles, many years in the shadow of someone great, Joshua is now the leader of the people of Israel. And that's his context. He's got to take this people, a rebellious, difficult, disobedient nation of people. He has to take them across the river and into the land promised them by God. And Joshua, in this position of leadership, has now to step up, face the future, and take this people into a land that's already occupied by other nations and other peoples. He has to lead them. He's got this responsibility of leadership placed upon him, and he has to step up to that role. Courage always is calling to us in a context. And I wonder what your context is today. I believe God is calling you to courage. But what's the context for you? Don't forget now, and I'll emphasize this, that call is always in a certain context. So for us as a congregation, our context is one thing. You as individuals, you'll have your own context. You're facing your own situations. Well, God is calling you in whatever situation you're in to courage. And that's the first thing to notice about the conditions. There's a context, and of course, there is a challenge. And we've already outlined a little bit of the challenge here that is facing Joshua. He's unique in his position of leadership because he's a leader of a nomadic people. At this point, they've been wandering the wilderness for 40 years or so. They have no settled towns or cities. They've no settled homes. They wander from place to place. There's always the challenge of where will they find food? Where will they find water? What will they face down the road a little bit? So here, for this man, are enormous challenges of leading a people on his own, in a sense. And I've mentioned already how difficult they are, how challenging they are as a people. They were very difficult. Moses found them extremely difficult to lead. And so can you see how this call to courage is in a context of challenge? The challenges now are overwhelming for this man, Joshua. And as we apply this to ourselves today, in your context, whether it's at home or in work, wherever you are facing challenges. And as you face those challenges, they're the same maybe as the challenges of the year that's just passed. Maybe new challenges will lie ahead for you and I. As we face those challenges, I want you to hear this call from God, the call to courage. The challenges ahead are going to be quite difficult, I'm sure. We'll have them as a congregation. You'll have them in your families. Individually, you'll have your challenges. They won't be on the scale of Joshua, I don't think, but they'll be enormous nonetheless, won't they? The challenges that you and I face. Some of them you're already carrying. Some of them you're already fearing. Some of the challenges, as yet, are unknown to us, but they're not unknown to God. So this call to courage in a context that's about challenges that we are facing, but it's also about change. And you get that sense, don't you, as you follow these 9 verses here in the book of Joshua. It's all about change. And they were very used to Moses. He'd been their leader for how long, maybe 40, 45 years or so. This great figure of Moses, no one like him ever before. As you read the end of Deuteronomy, you're told that there'd be no prophet like Moses, somebody who knew God face to face. Somebody who was a friend of God, who'd led them out of Egypt, brought them to Mount Sinai. This man, Moses, had gone up to Mount Sinai. He brought the 10 Commandments down. What a towering figure Moses was. One of the great all-time prophets of God. And now here comes Joshua. And it's all changed. And Joshua's not like Moses. He's not the same towering presence. He's not had the same experiences. He doesn't seem to know God as intimately as Moses did. So it's all change. Change for him. He's no longer an assistant, is he? He's leader now. Change for the people. They just know nothing other than Moses in so many ways. In fact, an entire generation had died out. And the younger generation now had matured and they'd only ever known Moses. So here comes change. And I want to suggest this to you. The conditions of the call to courage, they're in a context. It's about challenge, but it's also about change. And I wonder what change they will be for you and for me in the year ahead. What change may be for us as a congregation. And when you think about change, you think about changes, stuff happening, differences, new experiences, the familiar things passing away. We think of change like that, don't we? As something that's outside of us, that sort of happens to us. But I've also been thinking about change in this way. What change do you need to make in a new year? How should you change personally? What should I do to change? Should I change my habits, my way of thinking, my way of doing things? What sort of changes ought there to be for me in my outlooks and my attitudes? You see, change doesn't just have to be something that goes on around us and outside of us. I think we need sometimes to think about the change that we ought to bring inside of us to our attitudes and outlooks and habits and so on. So change is very much part of the conditions of the call to courage. Change for the Israelites, change for Joshua. They're going to cross the river, aren't they, and go into the land of Canaan. There'll be change for them again and again as they go, first of all, to Jericho. And they're going to march around the walls and so on. We know the story. They're going to move then from Jericho into the land, facing different peoples. There's all the challenges for you that we've talked about so far, but there'll be change. And change is so difficult. We hate change. I hate it. I'm sure you don't like it. But change will come, won't it, in this new year? There may be changes for us in society. There may be changes of government. There may be changes of all sorts. So the call to courage speaks to us in this context of change and challenge. Be strong and of good courage. So we see how this is all working out in these verses. You've got the call to courage, the conditions of the call to courage. What I want us to do now as we bring things to a close is I want you to think about what God is saying to Joshua here. And I think what he says is the constituents, the makeup of courage. So let's take a look at these three verses again. Verse 6. Be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Verse 7. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do all according to the law which Moses my servant commanded you to do. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. That's verse 7. And then verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now you see those three calls to courage. I want to add another verse to that list there that will help us think about what courage is based on. And that's verse 5. Take a look at verse 5. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you, nor forsake you. Now, if you want to, and I do this, circle verse 5 in your Bibles, because I want you to come back to that verse. Because what you find in verse 5 are the elements which, if you notice them, will equip you to be courageous. They are the constituents of courage. Take a look then, verse 5. First of all, I want you to notice continuity. Verse 5. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. There's continuity. And courage is always inspired by continuity. So that phrase, as I was, so I will be with you. There is this promise from God that God will be to Joshua the same God that he was with Moses. There's going to be no difference. God is not one God for Moses and then a different God for Joshua. God isn't going to do one thing with Moses and a different thing with Joshua. You have the continuity of the presence of God. And think about that, if you will. Think about that now as a congregation. We have the same God who was the God of 100 years ago, 50 years ago, the God who blessed congregations in the past, grew them, added to them, saved people, built congregations from nothing. We have the same God. He continues with us even into a new year. I don't know about you, but I think sometimes we fall into this idea in our heads that God is somehow, he was better in the past. He did more things in the past. He was more real in the past. And here we are today, we're on our own in a way. You know, we're a bit forgotten, a bit abandoned. Well, your courage will find new legs to stand on if you think about the continuity of God with us, as he was with you in your past, as he was with you before when you went through a difficult time, when you had lots of challenges, as he was with you, as he was with everyone else. God will be still. It is the continuity of God with us that will inspire courage as we go into this new year. So do you see it there in verse 5? As I was, so I will be. There's no change there. Change may be required of us, and change may go on around us, and a new year may bring change, but there is no change. God is the God of continuity, and he was always the God of his people. That's verse 5. And then look at what he goes on to say, the most famous of all phrases there in verse 5. You know it well. We've talked about it many times over the years. You know that it's taken up in Hebrews and chapter 13, this most wonderful phrase, I will not leave you nor forsake you. Now, you see, that's not just repetition. When he says to Joshua, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you, he's emphasizing continuity. So for the people, it's change. They've got a new leader. Joshua's now stepping up. So there's change, but God continues with them. But this phrase there, I will not leave you nor forsake you, something else is being emphasized there. And what's being emphasized is constancy, the constant presence of God. Not just that he will continue, but that he will continue to be constant in his nearness to you, his presence with you, his support for you, the comfort that he brings to his people. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now, I'm sure you can work it out for yourself. Here's God speaking to Joshua, and God is contrasting himself to Moses. Moses is gone, but I won't go. Things have changed, but I won't change. So you're going to be having all these challenges, but I'll never challenge you. I'll support you and be with you and be present for you. Now, that's what courage is all about. Be strong and of good courage. It means face whatever lies ahead for you. March towards it. Greet it. Embrace it. Whatever the change, whatever the challenge, whatever the context for you, for us as a congregation, Don't shrink away from it. Don't wish it otherwise. Be strong has this idea of meeting the challenge and the change. You're facing it head on, and you're doing it with this sense of the continuity of God's presence, the constancy of God, who emphatically says to you, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. The emphasis is on I, and it's thinking about every situation. The future is embraced in that phrase, and it's put negatively to bring out the positive truth, the ongoing, unchanging presence of God as we work out our lives in a particular context, with all the challenges, all the changes. God says to us, he will never leave us nor forsake us. Well, let's turn to our hymn books. We'll sing number 92. After we've sung the hymn, we'll take our seats again, and then we'll pray together. So number 92, Psalm 90, our God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from